The day everything collapsed started with a single sentence that shattered me. My wife looked at me with eyes I barely recognized anymore and said, "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." Those words hit harder than losing my job earlier that morning. I had walked into the factory I'd worked at for nearly 10 years, only to be told my position was gone. No warning, no thank you. Just a box with my things and a handshake that felt more like a dismissal of my existence. By the time Marielle threw her words at me, I already felt hollow. But when she said she was taking Nolan and Tessa, it was like she ripped the last pieces of my life away. I stood there, stunned, clutching the worn lunch bag my mother Leona had sewn for me years ago, the same one I carried every day to work. My children's laughter, their drawings on the fridge, the bedtime stories, I saw all of it slipping through my fingers in that moment. I couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. I stepped out without knowing where to go. The cool September air hitting my face as if the world itself was reminding me I had nothing left. My mind was spiraling, telling me she was right, that I had failed not just her, but Nolan and Tessa too. I wandered for what felt like hours until I found myself standing in front of a place I hadn't been before, a small diner glowing with warm yellow lights against the night. I pushed open the door and slid into a booth at the corner, staring at the steaming cup of coffee a waitress had placed in front of me. My reflection in the dark liquid looked like a man I didn't recognize, tired, broken, lost. I was so wrapped up in my own despair that I didn't notice the old man sitting down beside me until he spoke. "You look just like my son," he said in a steady, deliberate voice. I turned my head, confused. His weathered face was full of lines that spoke of decades of stories, but his eyes carried a pain I couldn't ignore. He added, "But he's been missing for 35 years. My heart pounded as I tried to process his words. Before I could respond, he leaned forward slightly, studying me as if I might vanish. What he said next, 5 simple words, would change the course of my life in a way I could never have imagined. I grew up in a family that believed in working with your hands, keeping your word, and carrying yourself with quiet pride. My father, Gareth, was a mechanic who could fix anything with an engine. He was never one to talk much, but when he did, his words stuck with me. A man is measured by how he stands when everything else falls apart. He told me once when I was a teenager sulking about a broken-down truck. At the time, I brushed it off. Years later, those words would echo in ways I never expected. My mother, Leona, balanced him perfectly. She was soft-spoken, but her kindness carried weight. She believed in second chances, in making people feel seen. She was the one who sat with me on nights I struggled with schoolwork, reminding me that patience and persistence mattered more than quick wins. I carried her lessons into adulthood, though somewhere along the way I began to feel like they no longer applied to me. I was never the star athlete, never the popular kid, never the man people pointed to with admiration. But I worked hard. I took pride in showing up early to the factory, even when my back ached or my hands were raw from handling steel. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and for a long time I believed it proved my worth. Then came Marielle. She was confident, quick-witted, and sharper than anyone I had ever met. Where I hesitated, she charged forward. She told me once early in our marriage, "You make me feel safe, Ethan, like the ground under my feet won't give way." I held on to that sentence for years. We built a family together, and when Nolan was born, followed by Tessa 3 years later, I thought we had found our rhythm. But as time passed, Marielle's words shifted. Instead of telling me I made her feel safe, she told me I made her feel stuck. Instead of seeing my consistency as strength, she saw it as complacency. "You never want more, Ethan," she would say after another argument about money. "You're fine staying at the bottom while everyone else climbs." She was right in some ways. I had dreams once, but I buried them under responsibility and routine. Every morning I punched the clock. Every evening I tried to be the husband and father I thought I was supposed to be. I believed it was enough. But enough for me was not enough for her. The kids, though, they never looked at me with disappointment. Nolan, at 10 years old, had his mother's sharpness but my quiet nature. He asked questions about everything, from how engines worked to why people argued when they loved each other. Tessa, at 7, lived with joy that could light up any room. She loved drawing animals and leaving them taped on the fridge for me to see when I got home. The two of them made the weight of my life feel lighter. They were the reason I kept pushing, even when the ground beneath me began to crack. My brother, Colden, was another voice in my life I couldn't ignore. He was younger, but more ambitious, always chasing bigger opportunities. He told me once over a beer, "You need to fight for yourself, Ethan. You keep letting life run you over." At the time, I laughed it off, but his words stayed lodged in the back of my mind. When the factory let me go, it was like a part of my identity was ripped out. I had walked through those steel doors nearly every day for a decade. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the machines. Losing that job wasn't just about losing a paycheck. It felt like losing proof that I mattered, that my hard work meant something. I drove home that afternoon with the box of my belongings on the passenger seat, staring at my reflection in the window as the world blurred past. My chest was tight, my thoughts loud. How would I tell Marielle? What would she say? When I stepped into the house, she was waiting. Her eyes scanned me, then the box in my arms. "They let you go, didn't they?" she asked. There was no concern in her voice, just a cold certainty. I nodded. Cutbacks, nothing I could do. She crossed her arms. "Nothing you could do. That's always your answer." I tried to explain, to tell her that I would find another job, that this didn't mean the end. But before I could finish, she said the words that still ring in my ears. "You're worthless. I'm taking Nolan and Tessa." In that moment, it felt like the walls of our home closed in. I wanted to argue, to shout, to prove her wrong. I looked at the photos on the wall, at the crayon drawings taped to the fridge, and felt a hollow ache spread through my chest. Marielle turned, gathered a bag, and told the kids they were staying at her sister's for the night. Nolan looked at me with wide, confused eyes. "Dad, are you coming?" he asked. My throat burned as I forced a smile and shook my head. "Not tonight, buddy. I'll see you soon." I stood in the doorway as they left, the sound of the car pulling out of the driveway cutting through the stillness of the house. Alone, I walked into the kitchen and placed the factory box on the table. Inside were the small tokens of my life's work: a dented thermos, a pair of worn gloves, a photo Nolan had drawn of me holding his hand. My chest felt like it was caving in. That was the state I was in when I stepped outside, leaving the house and everything inside it. My feet carried me without thought, each step heavier than the last, until the neon glow of a diner sign flickered in the distance. The diner was small, tucked between a pawn shop and a gas station, the kind of place most people drove past without a second glance. Its windows glowed with a faint yellow light, and the sign above the door buzzed in the night. I stepped inside, and the warmth wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't deserve. The air smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, a reminder of countless mornings when I had rushed through meals before heading to the factory. I slid into a booth near the back, away from the handful of customers scattered across the room. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, poured me a cup of coffee without asking. I nodded, muttered a thank you, and stared into the dark liquid. The reflection staring back at me looked older than 35, beaten down by the weight of failure. My hands shook slightly as I held the cup, though I never brought it to my lips. The voices in my head were louder than the hum of the ceiling fan. Marielle's words repeated over and over. "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." I tried to convince myself she didn't mean it, that she was angry and lashing out, but deep down I knew she had been building toward this for years. Every argument about money, every sigh when I walked in late from work, every moment I thought she wanted comfort but gave me silence. Instead, it all led to this. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to block out the noise in my mind. That was when I heard the scrape of a chair across the floor. Someone slid into the booth across from me. I lowered my hands and saw an old man staring at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. His face was weathered, his skin tanned and marked by time. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his clothes looked clean but worn, like he had lived a hard life. "You look just like my son," he said. His voice was steady, deliberate, the kind of voice that demanded attention. I blinked, confused, and shook my head. "You must be mistaken." He studied me as though I were a puzzle. "Number, you have his eyes, the way your jaw sets when you're holding back words. My boy disappeared 35 years ago, and I've been searching ever since. Then I see you sitting here, and for a moment I thought maybe—" He stopped, his lips pressing into a thin line. I leaned back against the booth, uneasy. "I'm sorry about your son, but I'm not him." The old man nodded slowly, but he didn't move. "Maybe not. But you carry the same look he did before he left. A man weighed down by something he doesn't know how to carry." His words stung because they felt true. I wanted to tell him to leave me alone, but a part of me couldn't. There was something in his eyes, something familiar, like he had carried pain for so long it had become part of him. "My name's Harlan," he said, extending his hand. I hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, warm, grounding. "Ethan," I replied quietly. Harlan nodded as though the name confirmed something. He leaned back, folding his hands on the table. "You've lost something. I can see it." I let out a hollow laugh. "Lost everything, actually. My job this morning, my wife tonight, and my kids." My throat tightened. She took them with her. Harlan didn't flinch. He just looked at me with the patience of someone who had sat through storms far worse. I know that kind of pain. Different details, but the same hollow feeling inside. You start to believe maybe the world is right about you. That you don't matter. That no one would notice if you walked out the door and never came back. His words cut through me like a blade. He was speaking the thoughts I had been too afraid to admit. I clenched my fists against the table. I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I try, it's not enough. I worked 10 years at that factory, and they let me go without a second thought. I built a home, and my wife tells me I ruined it. My kids. My voice cracked. They looked at me tonight like they didn't understand what was happening, and I had no answers. Harlan leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "You can't let that be the end of your story." I frowned. "What choice do I have?" He exhaled slowly, as though weighing his response. "You have the choice to stand, to fight, to refuse to let their words define you. Do you think I stopped searching for my boy because 35 years passed? Do you think I accepted the world's silence as the final word? Number. Because if I did, then his story would end with disappearance and mine with regret. I kept going because hope was all I had left, and that hope kept me alive." The diner seemed to fade around us, the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation disappearing under the weight of his words. For the first time since Marielle's sentence tore my life apart, I felt something flicker inside me. Something small, but undeniable. I looked at Harlan, unsure why this stranger had chosen me, why he spoke with such conviction to a man he had just met. But deep down, I understood. He saw the same emptiness in me that had lived in him for decades, and he refused to let me sink into it. That was when he leaned closer, his voice firm but gentle, and prepared to say the 5 words that would change everything. Harlan leaned forward, his hands resting on the worn surface of the booth table. His eyes stayed locked on mine as though he could see straight through me. Then, with a firmness that cut through the noise in my head, he said, "Don't abandon them like me." Those 5 words hit harder than anything Marielle had thrown at me, harder than losing my job, harder than the silence that followed when my kids were taken out of the house. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. It was as if he had reached inside and pulled the thoughts I was trying to bury into the light. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quiet, almost afraid of the answer. Harlan's gaze didn't waver. When my son disappeared, I looked back on the years before and saw a man who wasn't there, when it mattered. I worked long hours. I told myself I was providing, but really I was hiding. I was angry, short-tempered, always finding fault. I thought discipline meant silence. I thought love could be implied. Then, one night, he was gone. 35 years have passed, and not a day goes by that I don't ask myself if he left because he believed I didn't care, because I abandoned him in every way that counts, even while living under the same roof. His words sank into me like stones in water. I saw flashes of Nolan's wide eyes asking if I was coming with them. I saw Tessa's small hand gripping the strap of her backpack as she followed her mother out the door. I had told myself I was too broken to fight, too beaten down to stand, but in that moment I realized the truth. If I gave in now, I would be walking the same path Harlan regretted every day of his life. I pressed my palms flat against the table. I don't want to be that kind of father. I don't want them to grow up thinking I gave up on them. Harlan nodded slowly, relief flickering across his face. Then don't. You still have a chance. You can lose a job, you can lose a marriage, but you cannot lose yourself. Not unless you decide to hand yourself over. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. But what if she doesn't let me see them? What if she keeps pushing me out? His jaw tightened, and for the first time his voice carried a sharp edge. Then you fight. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with everything inside you that loves those kids. You show them you are there. You show them they matter more than your pride, more than your pain. You do not disappear into the night, and you do not let them wonder if you cared. Because if you abandon them now, Ethan, that question will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The conviction in his tone made my chest burn. I sat there, staring at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, speaking to me as if he had been, waiting his whole life to say these words. For the first time all day, I felt a fire spark inside me, something stronger than shame or despair. It was small, fragile, but it was real. I leaned back, my fists clenched, my breath steadying. I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to see my kids. I'm going to tell them the truth. I can't let their last memory of me be silence. Harlan's eyes softened, and for a moment he looked almost proud. That's it. That's the man your children need. Not perfect, not unbroken, but present. Strong enough to keep standing. I nodded, the weight of his words anchoring me. "Thank you," I said, and my voice cracked. "I don't know why you sat down here tonight, but I needed this more than I can explain." He gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. Maybe I didn't choose. Maybe it was meant to happen this way. The waitress came by, topping off our coffee, and I realized mine was still untouched. Harlan lifted his cup, sipped, and set it down with a quiet clink. "You know what you have to do now. Don't waste time. Don't let fear decide for you. Go to them." I stared at the coffee, then at my hands, scarred and rough from years at the factory. They weren't the hands of a successful man, not in Marielle's eyes. But maybe they could still be the hands of a father who refused to let go. I stood, my chair scraping against the tiled floor. "I'm going," I said, more to myself than to him. Harlan reached across the table, placing a steady hand on my arm. His grip was strong, almost unnaturally so for a man his age. "Remember what I told you. Don't abandon them like me." I nodded, the words seared into me. I turned and walked toward the door, my chest pounding with a new kind of energy. I pushed into the night air, the cool breeze carrying away the stale scent of grease and coffee. For the first time since the morning, my steps had purpose. As I crossed the empty parking lot, I glanced back at the diner. Through the window, I saw Harlan sitting there, still watching me. He lifted his cup in a small gesture, a silent send-off. I raised my hand in return, then climbed into my car. I knew where Marielle would be. She always ran to her sister's house when she needed backup. That was where she had taken Nolan and Tessa. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I started the engine. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I still had to fight for. I drove into the night, Harlan's words echoing in my mind. I didn't know what waited at the other end. I didn't know if Marielle would slam the door in my face or if the kids would even understand. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to abandon them. The drive to Marielle's sister's house felt longer than it should have, though I knew every turn by heart. My chest tightened with every mile, but Harlan's words kept me from turning the car around. Don't abandon them like me. I repeated it over and over until it became my anchor. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights inside the house were on. Shadows moved across the curtains, and I imagined my children sitting on the couch, wondering why their father wasn't there. The thought burned me from the inside out. I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. My hands trembled, but I forced them to stay steady as I knocked. The door opened, and there stood Marielle. Her hair was pulled back, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. I swallowed hard, but didn't look away. "I came for Nolan and Tessa. I'm not leaving without seeing them." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't the time, Ethan. They're already upset enough. You need to let this go." Something inside me shifted. For years, I had backed down, during arguments, too tired or too ashamed to push back. But not this time. "No," I said firmly. "I won't let it go. You can leave me if that's what you want, but you are not taking them away from me. They need their father, and I'm not going to disappear from their lives." Her eyes narrowed, but she hesitated. That moment of silence gave me courage. "Do you remember when we first held Nolan in the hospital?" I asked. My voice cracked, but I pushed on. "You told me I made you feel safe, like nothing could shake us. I haven't been perfect, Marielle, but I've always loved them, and I will not let them grow up thinking I didn't fight for them." From behind her, a small voice broke the tension. "Dad?" Nolan's face appeared around the corner, his eyes wide and searching. He stepped forward, and in that instant, the weight I had been carrying cracked open. "Nolan," I said, my throat thick. He ran to me before Marielle could stop him, wrapping his arms around my waist. His hug was desperate, like he had been holding in fear all night and finally let it out. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Tessa followed close behind, her little arms wrapping around my leg. "Daddy, are you staying with us?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. I knelt, pulling them both close, my arms trembling as I held them. "I'm here," I said, pressing my cheek against their hair. "I'm not going anywhere." Marielle stood in the doorway, her arms still crossed, but her eyes softened slightly. I could see the conflict on her face. She had expected me to stay broken, to disappear into the night like a man too weak to stand. Instead, she saw me standing taller than I had in years. "You think this changes anything?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "It changes everything," I said, "because I finally understand who I am. I may not have the best job. I may not have been the husband you wanted. But I am their father, and I will fight to be in their lives. You can't take that away." Nolan pulled back, looking up at me with determination in his eyes. "We need you, Dad." Hearing those words broke me open in a different way. The doubt, the shame, the voice in my head telling me I was worthless, all of it began to fade under the strength of my son's voice. Marielle's sister appeared behind her, frowning. "Maybe you should let him talk to the kids," she said softly. "They deserve that much." Marielle glanced back, then returned her gaze to me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she stepped aside. "Fine. You can see them. But this doesn't mean I've changed my mind." I stood, keeping my hands on my children's shoulders. "You don't have to change your mind tonight. But know this, I will not stop being their father. I won't back down again." We moved into the living room. Nolan sat pressed against me, Tessa on my lap, their small bodies clinging to mine as if I might vanish. I told them the truth in simple words they could understand, that sometimes parents fight, that sometimes people lose jobs and make mistakes, but that none of it would ever change how much I loved them. I could see in her expression that she wasn't ready to forgive or reconcile, but I also saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years: respect. The night stretched on with quiet conversation, the children's voices filling the space I thought I had lost forever. When I finally stood to leave, Nolan clung to my arm. "You'll come back tomorrow, right?" I bent down and met his eyes. "Tomorrow, and the next day, and every day I can. I'll never stop showing up for you." Tessa hugged me tightly. "Promise?" I kissed the top of her head. "I promise." As I stepped out into the cool night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The problems weren't gone. My marriage was still fractured, my job was still gone, and my future was uncertain. But for the first time, I wasn't paralyzed by those losses. I had something stronger pulling me forward: the love of my children and the choice to fight for them. I walked back to my car, replaying Nolan's words in my head. "We need you, Dad." Those 4 words carried more power than all of Marielle's bitterness, more weight than any pink slip from the factory. And behind those words was Harlan's voice, steady and unshakable. "Don't abandon them like me." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as I started the engine. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was and exactly where I was going. The morning after I confronted Marielle and saw my children, I woke with a different kind of weight in my chest. It was not the crushing burden of despair I had carried the day before. It was the heavy responsibility of a promise I had made to Nolan and Tessa, a promise that I would never walk away from them, no matter how broken I felt. The days that followed were not easy. Marielle stayed distant, guarded, and often cold in her words. She reminded me again and again that our marriage was not the same, that she was tired of carrying a man who never reached higher than the bare minimum. But even in her bitterness, she could not ignore the change in me. I did not argue with anger. I did not retreat into silence. I stood my ground with calm conviction, and every time I looked at my children, I remembered why. I picked up part-time work wherever I could, stocking shelves, delivering supplies, fixing small engines for neighbors. It was not glamorous, but it kept me moving, kept me proving to myself that I was still capable of building. Slowly, opportunities opened up. My father Gareth gave me tools from his shop, telling me it was time to put my hands to use in a way that was mine. My brother Colden stopped by and said, "I don't know what happened to you, but you finally look alive." Most importantly, my children never doubted me again. Nolan began asking me to help him with his school projects, pulling me in with excitement I had not seen in months. Tessa drew pictures of the 3 of us holding hands, taping them proudly to the fridge whenever I visited. They were watching me closely, learning not from my words but from my choices. And every day I showed up, I proved to them that their father was still standing. Weeks later, I returned to Darrow's diner. I wanted to thank Harlan, to tell him how his 5 words had redirected my life. When I stepped inside, I scanned the booths, but he was nowhere to be found. The same waitress approached, and I asked if she had seen him. "Harlan?" She repeated, frowning. "You mean Harlan Vaynor?" I nodded eagerly. "Yes, he sat with me here. Gray hair, strong build for his age, kind of serious but with a sharp presence." She gave me a puzzled look. I knew Harlan. He used to come in years ago, but he passed away a long time back. I haven't seen him in over a decade. The cup of coffee in my hand trembled slightly. I glanced around the diner, half expecting him to suddenly appear. But the booths were empty, the clatter of plates and hum of conversation carrying on as though he had never been there. I walked back to the corner booth where he had sat with me that night. I slid into the seat and stared at the table, running my hand across the smooth surface. Whether Harlan had been flesh and blood or something else entirely, his presence was real to me. His words were real. His warning had saved me from stepping into the same void that had consumed his life. I sat there quietly, whispering a thank you into the empty air, hoping somehow it would reach him. Then I left the diner, carrying his message forward, determined never to forget it. Looking back now, I understand the lesson he gave me. Life can strip you down to nothing. Jobs vanish, marriages break. People you trust can wound you in ways you never thought possible. But none of that means you stop fighting for the people who truly matter. A father's worth is not measured by his paycheck or the state of his marriage. It is measured by his presence, by his refusal to walk away, by the steady love that anchors his children even when the world shakes. I am still rebuilding. I am still learning to stand tall even when the ground feels unsteady. But I know now that I am not worthless. I am a father, and that is enough reason to keep moving forward. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: do not abandon the people who need you. Do not let despair convince you that walking away is easier than standing tall. Show up, even when it feels impossible, especially then, because sometimes the smallest act of staying present can change a life forever. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own life or the people you care about, I ask you to share this video with someone who might need it. Leave a comment below and tell me what you took away from this story. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together we can remind each other that no matter how broken life feels, there is always a reason to keep standing.